Hi, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to show you how to draw this hyper-realistic vintage car using graphite pencils. So let's get started. So as always, these are the art supplies I'm going to use for this drawing, and you can pause the video right here to note them down. I'm using this A3 size paper from my ordinary drawing paper pad, and the drawing position area is 11 x 14 inches. I drew the outline using grid method, and you can find the detailed step-by-step process from making the grid to outlining on my Patreon profile. Link is in the description. Okay, so before diving into the background shading process, first of all, I'm going to mask the edges of this paper using masking tape. It will help you get a straight and sharp border in the end. Let's start shading the background, and I'm using an 8B graphite powder with a bigger size dry brush to add this layer. If you don't have a graphite powder kit, you can make one at home by watching this video from the cards. Notice that I'm moving my brush in circular scribbling motions to achieve smooth and even background. I almost forgot to darken the outline of the car, so I'm darkening it now using an 8B pencil. You can darken these lines before starting this background shading process. Now for the areas near the outline, I'm shifting towards the medium-sized dry brush to avoid excessive spilling or smudging of graphite. Okay, so let's shade the car, and I'm using an 8B pencil to fill this roof portion first. Notice that I'm firstly darkening the outline and then filling in the remaining inner portion with the same 8B pencil but with slightly less pressure. In this way, you will get a perfect 3D base. Moving on to the steering, and I'm darkening the outline first and then shading the semi-circular portion with a pitch black shade. I'm repeating the similar process of darkening the directional lines first and then filling in the area with variable pressure for the dashboard and rear view mirror as well. Now for the windshield, I'm filling in the area using a 2B graphite powder with a bigger size dry brush. To shade the nooks and corners, I'm using my 8B pencil and layering the graphite very carefully. I'm keeping the pressure and angle low on my pencil to avoid any harsh strokes or lines. When the 8B layer is done, it's time to lock this layer, and I'll be using graphite locking technique. I'm using a 2H pencil and going over the required area with a very light pressure. It will fill in the empty spots if any, along with embedding the graphite from previous layers into its place. And the base will start to look more smooth without any blending. Some of the areas are still looking a little bit dull, so I'm using my 8B pencil to shade these required areas. I'm also adding these horizontal lines for the back side of the car using the same 8B pencil. And by the way, you can get access to our premium content and support this channel through Patreon. You can sign up through different membership levels and get access to all the outline and grid references, etc. We have an ever-growing library of hundreds of exclusive and real-time tutorials. And you will also get access to 4 new tutorials every month. You can also share your artworks in our active community of patrons and participate in our weekly critique sessions where I give my honest and positive critiques on your artworks, so you can improve your skills and get better with your drawing. Visit the link in description and become a premium member today. Okay, so as the darker base is done, let's start the detailing process. And I'm firstly erasing the spill of graphite from this portion of the roof by using a flat tip mono zero eraser. As you can see that the outline of this white stripe is not even. So to fine tune it, I'm using a 2H pencil first to draw the outline and then shading the area above that line to create a darker stripe for the roof. Now moving on to the side mirror, and I'm using an electric razor with a sharp tip to add highlights. The highlights are looking a little bit wider, so I'm using my 8B pencil again and going around them very carefully, and this will make the wider highlights look more thin and defined. I'm going back and forth with my eraser and pencil to add the required texture, just like the way I added earlier. And for the right side of the car body, I'm using my mono zero eraser and firstly adding a curved highlight for the top corner, and then using the same eraser and adding a straight line along the right outline. To fine tune this highlight, I'm again using my 8B pencil and going around it to make it more even and crisp. I'm using the same pencil to add depth to the inside of the car. Now to blend this layer thoroughly, I'm using the same graphite locking method as I discussed earlier and going over the layer using an H pencil. You can clearly see how this will blend the layer without making it dull. Okay, so now to make this steering shiny and 3D, I'm adding these curved strokes along the outline using my Mono Zero eraser. And these two tiny strokes will amp up the whole look of it. Moving on to the rear view mirror, and I'm adding highlights using my electric eraser. Make sure to keep the tip clean and sharp while adding such intricate details to get fine and crisp results. As the brighter highlights are done, let's add the softer ones using a Mono Zero eraser. I'm also adding this straight line along the rod of this mirror, and this will immediately make it look rounded. Now to add the final touches in the mirror, I'm using my sharp tip 8B pencil. I'm shading and adding dots and strokes in the required areas very carefully. Okay, so moving on to the bonnet portion, and I'm repeating the similar process of darkening the directional lines first so that they don't fade away in the future shading and blending process. For the headlight portion, along with darkening the directional lines, I'm also shading the required areas with a variable pressure to achieve a 3D base, and then using scale to add these vertical lines to create a glass texture. Notice that I'm keeping the angle on my pencil very low to add these lines, and that is how you will achieve thick and soft strokes. I'm also filling in the glass portion using the same 8B pencil, but keeping the pressure variable to achieve different tones. Okay, so let's add the base layer in the rest of the bonnet portion, and I'm using my 8B pencil with a very low angle for this purpose. As always, I'm using my favorite pressure technique to add this layer. If you're not comfortable with pressure technique, then you can also use lighter grade pencil like 2B or 3B to shade these lighter areas. And then to add the required depth, you can shade the areas with 8B pencil. But I would highly suggest practicing this pressure technique, as it is not only very useful but also saves a lot of time and energy, and it makes the drawing process more interesting. So after you are done with the base layer, start blending it using a medium-sized draw brush. This left portion looks a little bit dull, so I'm going over this area again using an 8B pencil and then blending it afterwards. To make this base layer even better, I'm using a tissue paper and blending the whole area again. After the blending is done, let's add the required depth using an 8B pencil. I'm keeping the pressure on my pencil high where I need darker shade, and then reducing it as I move away from these areas to create a perfect blended layer. Make sure to keep the angle very low to avoid harsh lines and strokes during this entire shading process. Now it's time to blend this layer, but I'll be using a small dry brush so that I can only target the required portions. If we look at the reference image, we can see that the bonnet looks velvety smooth. So to achieve such smoothness, we have to add layer after layer with precision. So for this area near the headlight, I'm using a 2H pencil and going over the previous layer. This will help in achieving the pitch black layer. And for the headlight, I'm using a small sized draw brush and going over the whole area. This will add a light base layer along with blending the texture we added earlier. I'm leaving this small section on the right side as it is lighter in the reference image. Okay, now let's add some final touches and highlights on the windshield using my electric eraser. And as always, I'm adjusting the corners of these highlights using a sharp tip 8B pencil. I'm now defining this right edge of the windshield with the help of a Mono Zero eraser, and it will immediately make it look complete. Moving on to the detailing of the bonnet, and I'm using this same flat tip Mono Zero eraser. I'm carefully going around this darker line and rotating my eraser to get a crisp yet thin line. And look at how this small detail made this area look 3D and realistic. Now using this same Mono Zero eraser, I'm defining the edges of this broad white stripe. To make the outline even more defined, I'm shading the surrounding areas using an 8B pencil. It will fill all the empty or dull spots while making the white ones pop up even more. You can also lightly shade this top portion of the bonnet and then blend it afterwards using a small draw brush. The right side of the white strip has a little bit of shadow, so to mimic such an effect, I'm using my 2H pencil and shading the required area with a low pressure and angle. I'm using my 8B pencil with a very low pressure on it. And now to lock and blend this layer, I'm again using my 2H pencil over it. Now let's move on to the detailing of the bonnet by starting from the top and adding a base of highlights using Mono Zero eraser. To make the right side of this highlight look smooth, I'm using my perfection eraser and going over and around the previously added highlights. I'm going back and forth with my tools to further perfect this texture. Now to make the wiper nozzle shiny and 3D, I'm using my electric razor with a very light pressure to add the small curved strokes and dots. And then for the brighter highlights, I'm firstly sharpening the tip of my eraser and then adding the required highlights. Now as always, I'm fine tuning the edges by using an 8B pencil. It allows you to control the thickness of the highlight you've added. Okay, so for the top front portion of the bonnet, I'm using the same perfection eraser with a very low angle. Now by using the flat tip mono zero eraser, I'm adding a curved stroke starting from the end of the darker stroke and moving my hand upwards. And for the lower portion, I'm going along the darker line and adding this thin line stroke on the left side of it. Shadows and highlights play an important role in making the objects appear 3D and realistic. Now the top edge of the highlight is mixed with the upper one, so I'm using my 8B pencil and shading the center portion to create a separation between them. Now as this left highlight is done, I'm extending the right one downwards all along the darker stroke. And to make this sharp stroke look blended and smooth, I'm using my perfection eraser and carefully going over and around this highlight by keeping the pressure variable. Okay, so moving on to the rest of the bonnet portion, and I'm using the same perfection eraser and picking up the excess graphite from all these lighter areas. As this portion looks extremely smooth in the reference image, so to achieve such texture, I'm carefully using a back and forth motion to blend the edges of the highlights with its surrounding. Now to blend this whole area, I'm using a soft tissue paper and going over the area in a circular motion. And look how beautifully it is blending the layers together and giving us the results that we wanted. Never hesitate to go back and forth with your tools to achieve the desired results. I'm repeating the similar process for the right side of the bonnet as well with the same tools I used earlier. Okay, so now let's move on to the detailing of the headlight, and I'm firstly using a mono zero eraser and going along the darker stroke on the left side. Now to fine tune this highlight, I'm using an 8B pencil with a sharp tip and going over the required areas. For the hood of the headlight, I'm using my clean tip mono zero eraser and picking up the excess graphite to make it look shiny. And for the right side, I'm using both perfection and mono zero eraser in between to lighten up the area. And for the whole outline of the light, I'm using a mono zero eraser and carefully adding a ring of white highlights. Make sure to take time while adding such intricate detail, as one step can lead to messy and unrealistic results. To make the highlight pop up even more, I'm using a sharp tip electric eraser and adding the required highlights, and then fine-tuning the added strokes by using an 8B pencil. I'm repeating the similar process of adding and fine-tuning the circular highlights for the inner portion as well. Now as we know that light is made of glass and it has some reflections and patterns. So to mimic such an effect, I'm using my mono zero eraser and first of all lightening the excessive graphite from the left side of the light. Now I'm shifting towards my sharp tip electric eraser to create a perfect rectangular reflection. To make this highlight even more shiny and defined, I'm going over the previously added layer with a very light pressure on my eraser. And that's how the overall highlight will pop up a little bit more. Now let's make those lines texture realistic, and for that I'm firstly picking up the excessive graphite from the lighter areas. Now to tone down the sharp edges of the added highlights, I'm using my perfection eraser and going along the edges respectively with a very low pressure. I'm now using my electric eraser and going over some of the strokes to make them even more shiny. Moving on to the smaller light, and I'm repeating the similar method of adding a white ring along the curvature using a mono zero eraser, and then fine tuning its edges using an 8B pencil with a sharp tip. The only difference is that it doesn't have a textured glass. So I'm only shading the area first using an 8B pencil and then blending it afterwards. And to add some dimension, I'm using my perfection eraser and adding the required blended strokes and highlights. To create this bulging effect, I'm using my eraser to add highlights on the top left and right side of the light respectively. I'm going back and forth with my tools to achieve perfect texture. Before moving on to the next portion, I'm firstly darkening the directional lines so that they don't fade away during the future shading and blending process. I'm adding highlights and details on the lower portion of the bonnet just like the way I added for the top portion. Okay, so let's move on to my most favorite part, that is the front of the grill shading and detailing. And first of all, I'm adding these directional lines by simply eyeballing the width and number of the columns. If you're not confident enough with the eyeballing, then you can simply use the grid line to locate the exact position of these lines and then add them accordingly. Now when you have marked all the columns, let's add a base layer using a 2B graphite powder with a medium-sized toy brush. I'm going over the directional lines using my flat tip mono zero eraser very carefully. Okay, so now for the rows, I'm adding small horizontal lines on every 0.5 cm marking, and then repeating the similar process for the rest of the columns as well. Take your time while adding these strokes, as we don't want the grill to look uneven and deformed at the end. Okay, so now as the overall layout of the texture is done, it's time to fine tune the edges of the individual rectangles. And I'm adding these small slant lines at the edges to transform the rectangles into hexagons. Now as always, I'm using my 8B pencil to fine tune the edges and add shade inside these hexagonal shapes. And look how fine and crisp the grill started to look after the 8B pencil layer. The right portion of the grill has a little bit of shadow, so to mimic such an effect, I'm using my 2H pencil and lightly shading the area by keeping the pressure low. I'm now using my electric razor to remove the excessive graphite from the center portion, and then adding darker details using my 8B pencil and locking it down using a 2H pencil afterwards. Okay, so for the right side metallic texture, I'm firstly darkening the directional lines and shading the required areas respectively using an 8B pencil afterwards, and then blending it using a dry brush. Now it's time to make these metallic portions shiny, and I'm using my mono zero eraser to add these strokes and lines. And then to further fine tune these highlights, I'm using my electric razor and going over some of these strokes very slowly. To further fine tune the edges of the darker strokes, I'm using my 8B pencil and going over the details. The lower left portion has a reflection of the grill, so I'm making this compressed grill texture using my mono zero eraser. The bumper portion is quite dark and almost blending with the background, so I'm shading the area accordingly. The texture on the lower portion of the bumper is a little bit different, so I'm adding these small slant strokes using my mono zero eraser. I'm keeping the length and distance between the strokes random to achieve realistic results, as too much uniformity takes the essence of realism away. When we look at the reference image, we can see that the background is pitch black, so I'm going over the layer again to make sure all the spots are filled and blended properly. And with this last step, we are done with this hyper-realistic vintage car drawing. It takes so much time and efforts to create these free drawing tutorials for you guys. So please leave a like if you enjoyed this one. It helps me a lot as an artist. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.